Episode 8, Articles for the week of April 9th to 11th, 2026. Hello, my name is Welcome to the Bear of Bad News. I'm your host, Lore Bear, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, so I won't. This is your weekly recap of positive news stories from around the world. Articles included in this broadcast were originally published from April 9th to 11th, 2026. The stories in this episode are sourced from various news outlets and publications. The Bear of Bad News does not conduct independent fact-checking or verification of these stories. Listeners are encouraged to review original sources for accuracy and complete context. We are not responsible for the accuracy or content of third-party reporting, which is a fancy way of saying, I read it, I didn't report it. And here are this week's stories. First up, Mexico's President Sheinbaum decrees universal health care for $120 million. From thedeepdive.ca, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has issued a landmark decree to establish a universal healthcare service, initiating a process to ensure all 120 million citizens can access any public medical institution. The first phase begins April 13th with the rollout of a new universal healthcare credential, starting with citizens aged 85 and older. This unified digital and physical platform aims to eventually streamline care across facilities like the Mexican Social Security Institute, IMSS, the Institute for Social Security and Services for State Workers, ISSSTE, and IMSS Bienestar. The plan marks a bold step toward equitable healthcare access with the goal of allowing patients to seek treatment at any public hospital or clinic regardless of their specific employment-based enrollment. While registration begins this month, the full exchange of medical services between these institutions is slated to begin on January 1st, 2027. By integrating services through a digital system and unifying medical records, the government intends to reduce bureaucratic hurdles and improve efficiency for millions who have long faced fragmented care options. Up next, a dream come true, Brazil's blue and yellow macaws return to Rio after 200 years. From TheGuardian.com, images of the iconic blue and yellow macaw can be spotted all over Rio de Janeiro. Yet, the real thing has been seen so rarely in the Brazilian city that some wondered if it ever really existed there at all. The French explorer Jean de Leray first described an abundance of the giant, colorful parrots around indigenous tribes in the 16th century, and the Austrian naturalist Johann Natterer cited the Ararauna in the city in 1818. After that, the record goes blank. Experts say the species was almost certainly wiped out by deforestation, along with the tapirs, jaguars, and peccaries that once roamed the forests surrounding the city. Now, 200 years later, flashes of blue and gold are once again peppering the forest canopy as biologists bring the species and the forest back to life. They are so magnificent, it is no surprise that all of the visitors are constantly asking how they can see them, says Viviane Lasmar, director of Tiwaka National Park. For me, as the head of the park, it's special, but even more so as a carioca, someone from Rio, it's a dream come true. Tiwaka is one of the world's largest urban parks. It's nearly 4,000 hectares, or 10,000 acres, of green canopy cover the steep granite mountains of Rio, closely hugging the city's concrete limits. This lush remnant of Brazil's Atlantic rainforest feels wild and remarkably untouched, but exploitation for commodities such as coffee and charcoal in the 19th century decimated the forest. In what many see as one of the world's first tropical reforestation initiatives, Emperor Dom Pedro II ordered the replanting of trees in Tiwaka in the 1860s, but many species had already been lost. The blue and yellow macaw was one of the victims of this deforestation, with its colorful plumage also making it a prized target for wildlife traffickers. They probably went extinct in Rio due to the wildlife trade and deforestation during the European colonization here, says Marcelo Ryan Gantz, executive director of ReFauna, which estimates that 2/3 of large and medium-sized mammals that once lived in Tiwaka have also been lost. But, one by one, these animals are returning to the forest. For the first time in centuries, giant rodents scuttle through the undergrowth, yellow-footed tortoises meander languidly, and howler monkeys swinging through the trees, their bellowing calls echoing for miles. Only 4 macaws have been brought back so far, but it sounds like dozens as their aggressive squawks pierce the rainforest canopy. It's really beautiful to be putting the forest orchestra back together again. Ryan Gant says with a broad grin. Fauna started restoring the rainforest through its refaunation program, introducing the red-rumped agouti, a long-legged rodent the size of a cat, in 2010, followed by the other species that exist elsewhere in Brazil but were extinct in the park. These include the brown howler monkey, which was probably last recorded in Rio in Charles Darwin's Beagle Diaries in 1832, and the yellow-footed tortoise. All the reintroductions have brought excitement and new visitors to the park, but none are as beloved as the macaws. The large parrots, almost a meter in length, which can be found in other parts of Brazil and South America, are famously intelligent and mate with their partner for life. The blue and yellow macaws adorn artwork, t-shirts, and tote bags across the city and beyond, its colors echoing the country's national flag. The hero of the blockbuster film Rio was a plucky macaw trying to save the last of his kind, though Ryan Gantz is quick to point out that it was the Spix macaw that is endemic to northeastern Brazil. Now we are correcting the story and putting the right species here, he says, chuckling. 3 females and a male have been brought to the park so far and are currently back in their enclosure for monitoring after being released for 15 days earlier this year. Refauna is planning to release them again in September. The release schedule for September is a significant milestone in the process, though not necessarily the final one. All individuals will continue to be monitored and recapture may take place if required, says Ryan Gantz. Macaws, Fernanda, Sultan, Fatima, and Sully, named after actors in the Oscar-winning film I'm Still Here and characters from the popular Brazilian sitcoms Slaps and Kisses, all have distinct personalities, according to the Refauna team, with the mischievous Sully, who destroys almost everything she touches, a particular favorite. Another 6 macaws will soon be brought to the park, and eventually Refauna plans to release 50 of them. The sight of a mosaic of gold and blue sweeping through the skies would be a spectacular, but the project is about saving the rainforest rather than creating a spectacle, says Vanessa Kainan, director of Instituto Fauna Brazil. Up next, teen birth rates hit another historical low in 2025, CDC says. From NPR.org, the teenage birth rate in the U.S. fell by 7% in 2025, continuing decades of decline, according to a report published Thursday by the National Center for Health Statistics. A 7% decline is really quite extraordinary, says the report's lead author, Brady Hamilton, a statistician demographer with the center, which is part of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Overall, nearly 126 babies were born to mothers ages 15 to 19, according to the analysis of provisional data. The birth rate for that age group was 11.7 births per 1,000 females. By contrast, the teen birth rate in 1991 was 61.8 births per 1,000. The report also explored other topics related to births in the United States. The overall birth rate fell 1% from the previous year, also continuing a long decline. The rate from preterm births was unchanged, and the cesarean delivery rate increased to 32.5% in 2025, which is the highest rate since 2013, continuing a slight upward trend. Notably, the provisional report does not include an analysis of births by the mother's race or ethnicity, even though those were included in this report in the last few years. CDC told NPR in a statement that this year's report is covering fewer topics than previous provisional birth reports, but also that race data is still available on CDC's Wonder Online database. This provisional report comes out every year in the spring based on more than 99% of registered births for the previous year. It gives us basically a sneak peek at some key factors that we can expect when we get the final data for that year. The final data is usually published in August. The harder why question. While birth certificates provide a great deal of demographic, geographic, and other kinds of detail about a birth, the birth certificate does not allow us to address the question of why, Hamilton says. Many factors are driving the 35-year decline in teen birth rates, says Bianca Allison, pediatrician and associate professor at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. What is actually affecting the birth rates are likely lower rates of teen pregnancy overall, which is in the context of higher use of contraception and lower sexual activity for youth, and then also continued access to abortion care, she says. While there has been a lot of concern about declining general birth rate in the US, the decline in teen births is harder to parse as a good or bad news story. I think it depends on who you're talking to and how they're positioned and looking at the data, says Allison, a fellow of Physicians for Reproductive Health, an advocacy group that favors abortion rights and supports health equity. From my perspective, as somebody who specifically studies the provision of high quality reproductive health care and access for young people, this should be celebrated as long as is aligned with what people are actually wanting for themselves. She adds that there are a lot of negative narratives associated with teen parenthood in terms of educational and career potential. Many of these outcomes are due to the lack of societal, institutional, and systemic supports that young people receive to parent, not their lack of ability to parent, she argues. She hopes that the declining teen birth rate doesn't make people think this issue is gone. We cannot get our foot off the gas pedal of continuing to invest in supports for teen parents to help them reach their goals. They need educational, social, and medical help to thrive, she says. All those things are incredibly important. I do think it's important to note that it's not always perfect. Life isn't always perfect, and not to mark a declining teen birth rate as inherently good. Up next, from EV stations to heat pump grants inside France's $240 million plan to reduce its fossil fuel reliance. France wants to fast track its electrification as the war on Iran continues to highlight the dangers of fossil fuel reliance. Europe's oil and gas prices could remain high for a while despite dips in the market following the announcement of a 2-week-long ceasefire. Weeks of strikes on Gulf... This is old news that way, but it doesn't matter, people. Weeks of strikes on Gulf facilities are expected to have a multi-year impact on gas supply, while the Strait of Hormuz, which carries around 1/5 of global oil supplies, has been effectively closed since the war began. Soaring prices have encouraged Europeans from across the continent to move towards homegrown clean energy, with the uptake of electrical vehicles, EVs, heat pumps, and rooftop solar panels increasing in several nations. The UK has also become the latest European country to greenlight plug-in solar systems to help thousands cut their energy bills. Is France finally turning its back on fossil fuels? On April 1st, the French government announced it was moving to accelerate the electrification of its economy and phase out reliance on fossil fuel imports. The issue is no longer about climate change, it now concerns national interest, Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu said at the time. The government already aims to cut France's dependency on fossil fuels from 60% to 40% by 2030. This will mainly be achieved by electrifying transport and buildings, as well as the wider option of EVs and heat pumps. The French government's electrification plan set a positive precedent for Europe in structurally addressing the current energy crisis, says Neil Macaroff, director of Pan-Europe think tank Strategic Perspectives. France is uniquely positioned to lead the continent's electrification with abundant low-carbon electricity, an established nuclear fleet, and vast renewable potential, particularly in offshore wind and solar power. Earlier this year, France announced it was aiming for 60% electricity consumption by 2030, with 6 nuclear reactors and a mix of renewables spearheading the drive. This week, state-owned energy firm Électricité de France, EDF Group, unveiled a $240 million investment to support France's electrification. It has earmarked $30 million in purchase subsidiaries for transport operators converting diesel-chugging trucks into electric heavy goods vehicles, with the average subsidy amounting to $15,000 per truck. A further $50 million will be allocated in the installation of 180 charging stations for long-distance electric trucks across mainland France within the next 3 years. $80 million will be dedicated to supporting projects for the installation of new electricity-consuming industries in France. EDF says it will also offer turnkey sites with grid connections to reduce industrial setup times. This means instead of waiting years for approvals to connect to the grid, companies will be able to start operating much more quickly. The support fund will also provide a flat-rate grant of $1,000 combined with existing schemes to 80,000 low-income households for the installation of a heat pump to replace gas or oil boilers. Today, more than ever, we want to accelerate the electrification of uses in order to help the country reduce its dependence on fossil fuels, particularly gas and oil, says Bernard Fontana, CEO of the EDF Group. Fontana adds the €240 million commitment. Fontana adds the €240 million commitment is proof that EDF is taking concrete action to support France's energy and industrial sovereignty. Up next, in a first, renewables beat natural gas on U.S. grid last month. From canarymedia.com, it's not an easy moment for renewable energy in the U.S., but the sector is still setting records. Just look at what happened last month. Over the course of March, the nation got more electricity from renewables than it did from natural gas, which is typically the single largest source of energy on the U.S. grid. It's the first time renewables have bested the fossil fuel in the U.S. across an entire month per data pulled from the think tank Ember. Meanwhile, emissions-free sources, a category that includes both renewables and nuclear, produced more than half of the nation's energy. It's just the third time that's happened across an entire month, the first instance being last March. Sure, renewables only beat gas across a short time frame, and yes, March is the start of the spring shoulder season when electricity demand falls a bit from its winter highs and renewables tend to outperform. But it's a major milestone despite these caveats. Just 5 years ago, the gap between gas and even the best months for renewables was yawning. Since then, that gap has narrowed thanks in large part to the rapid expansion of solar and the steady growth of wind power. Hydropower, bioenergy, and other sources of renewable energy have seen their combined share of electricity production slowly decline over the same period. Renewables have crossed this threshold amid serious political pushback. The Trump administration has relentlessly attacked the sector, especially wind, over the last year and change. The policy shifts are likely to result in fewer new solar and wind farms over the medium term, but in the short term, they haven't really derailed the growth of clean energy. In fact, March was the best ever month for wind in terms of electricity output. But perhaps more impressive is that renewables are growing their market share while overall electricity demand climbs. Put simply, clean energy is taking a bigger slice of the growing pie. Gas power plants, for their part, remain difficult to build due to supply chain bottlenecks, while solar power, batteries, and wind together will once again make up the overwhelming majority of new energy capacity added to the grid this year. The same was true last year and the year before and the year before that. Even as the Trump administration creates obstacles to building new renewables, a key pair of facts will hold. The U.S. needs more electricity, and renewables are the easiest way to get it. In other words, don't expect this to be the last month in which renewables conquer gas. Up next, Portugal's plastic recycling rates lag behind European targets, but a new scheme aims to change that. From Euronews.com, Portugal has one of the lowest utilization rates for recycled materials in the EU at only 3% in 2024. Oh, come on, Portugal. You're making all the European countries look bad, man. Oy, oy, oy. Until today, when buying a bottled drink or a canned beverage in the supermarket in Portugal, the cost of the container was included in the price, as is the case in most countries. As of Friday, 10th of April, however, a deposit fee of around 10 cents is now applied to each bottle and can purchased. This amount will be listed on receipts separately from the price of the product. It is a similar concept to paying for a plastic bag, but with the big difference that it is a deposit, meaning you can get your money back. Here's how it works. Sorry, is this new to Europe? Because that's how we do it in Canada. What do you mean? What do you mean? Okay, wait, move on. Portugal's plastic bottle deposit scheme. The Volta program aims to encourage consumers to recycle plastic, metal, and aluminum bottles or cans to help meet Portugal's target of collecting 90% of the bottles and cans covered by the SDR, deposit and refund system, by 2029. Not all packaging is included in the new system. Only bottles and cans of up to 3 liters will be sold at the additional cost of around 10 cents. The new SDR system for bottles and cans comes after Portugal's very low rate for the use of recycled materials in 2024 at around 3%, the third lowest among EU member states. Third lowest? Portugal currently recycles 37% of bottles, well below the European target of 70% set for 2030. Several European countries such as Germany, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Lithuania, Estonia, the Netherlands, Croatia, and Belgium already have systems like this in place, and some of them have been doing so for more than a decade. Dude, we've been doing it that way since like the 80s? Boy. Up next, record number of homes in Great Britain turn to green energy as fuel prices soar. A lot of energy because of gas cost articles. Interesting. From theguardian.com, British households are turning to green home energy upgrades in record numbers to try and keep bills down as the Iran crisis sends global oil and gas prices soaring. Data from leading energy suppliers suggests figures show demand for solar panels, electric vehicles, and heat pumps in Great Britain has leapt since the war began on the 28th of February as households brace for sharp increases in monthly payments when the next energy price cap takes effect in the summer. Energy bills are expected to increase by 18% from July to the equivalent of £1,929 for the typical annual dual fuel tariff, after Europe's benchmark gas price rose by about 50%. Octopus Energy, the biggest Great Britain energy supplier, shared figures with The Guardian showing its heat pump orders had more than doubled in March compared with February, while sales of solar-powered systems were up almost 80% and new leases of electric vehicles rose by more than 85%. The same trend was noted by the sector's second biggest player, British Gas, which has recorded a 250% increase in solar panel installation inquiries since the 28th of February. It has also noted a significant increase in those expressing interest in heat pumps, a spokesperson said. British families are tired of being held hostage by global fossil fuel prices, said Rebecca Dibbs-Simkin, the chief product officer at Octopus. We're seeing a massive shift as people take matters into their own hands, switching to solar, heat pumps, and EVs, locking in low running costs and shielding themselves from future price shocks. Alan Burgess from Great Yarmouth was one Octopus customer who chose last month to install a heat pump rather than rely on heating oil, which is used by more than 1 million UK households to warm their homes and provide hot water, especially in rural areas not connected to the gas grid. Once the war in Iran started, I knew I had to switch, he said. I'd been paying £250 for 500 litres of heating oil, but this rocketed up to £700 in less than a week. I was really worried about what might happen because I was running low on heating oil and had absolutely no idea how high prices could go. Heating oil is not covered by Ofgem's cap, and British users have complained of rocketing prices and supply shortages since the war broke out. Its price is closely linked to the cost of jet fuel, which has soared since Iran in effect closed the Strait of Hormuz. Europe relies on the Gulf refineries for about 60% of its jet fuel imports, and the UK is considered one of the countries most at risk of shortages. Up next, wildlife to replace historical figures on banknotes, and you get a say. From the BBC.com, British wildlife will replace historical figures on the next series of Bank of England banknotes, and the public will get their say on which animals and birds will appear. Images of wildlife would be difficult to counterfeit, while also allowing for a celebration of nature across the country, the bank said. It spells the end for the sometimes controversial choice of historical characters which have appeared on £5, £10, £20, and £50 notes for more than 50 years. A panel of experts will draw up a wildlife shortlist to put before the public. The final decision is made by the bank's governor, but is likely to be a few years before the new notes enter circulation. The key driver for introducing a new banknote series is always to increase counterfeit resilience, but it also provides an opportunity to celebrate different aspects of the UK, said the bank's chief cashier, Victoria Cleland, whose signature appears on the notes. Nature was the most popular theme in the 44,000 responses to a public consultation and focus groups on banknote imagery. Some 60% of respondents selected it as one of their preferred themes, ahead of the architecture and landmarks, historical figures, arts and culture, sports, innovation, and noteworthy milestones suggested, the bank said. Wildlife already appears on banknotes in the UK, with mackerel, otters, red squirrels, and osprey featuring on notes issued by the Royal Bank of Scotland. The panel of experts choosing the contenders to feature on the next set of Bank of England's designs is made up of wildlife filmmakers and presenters Gordon Buchanan, Miranda Krestofnikov, Nadim Pereira, alongside Ulster Wildlife's Katie Bell, and academics Steve Oram Murad and Don Scott. Pereira said the wildlife of the UK is not separate from our culture. It sits on our football crests, our folklore, our coastlines, and our childhoods. Giving it space on something as symbolic as our currency feels both overdue and significant. Safe choice. The monarch has appeared on Bank of England notes since 1960 and will continue to do so in the future. Images of historical characters starting with William Shakespeare were first seen on the reverse side a decade later. The current crop on circulating notes in ascending order of note value are Sir Winston Churchill, Jane Austen, J.M.W. Turner, and Alan Turing. The banknote found itself mired in controversy owing to the absence of any women apart from Queen Elizabeth on any notes in 2013. There's never been a historical figure who is black or from any ethnic minority background on the banknotes. Bosses at the bank may feel that they are less likely to face a backlash with choices of wildlife. However, the naming of the robin as the UK's favorite bird did have its critics. In the summer, the public will be invited to say which specific wildlife native to the UK from the shortlist they would like to be featured on the next series of banknotes. Household pets will not be considered. The new notes may also incorporate other elements from nature, such as plants and landscapes, to complete the design. The bank may hope to match the success of Bermuda Monetary Authority's $5 note, which is the latest winner of the International Banknote Society's Banknote of the Year award. The note is predominantly pink and carries images of a blue marlin, dolphins, and tuna fish, as well as a profile of King Charles III. The back of the vertically designed note combines butterflies, flora, Horseshoe Bay, and a boat passing beneath Somerset Bridge. Animals in nature, as well as railways and TV nostalgia, featured strongly among the ideas sent to the BB's Your Voice when we asked for your views on banknote themes last year. Up next, makeshift Gaza University offers chance to resurrect academic studies. From AlJazeera.com. Hey, Al Jazeera! The new academic semester kicked off in Gaza in late March, but the mornings no longer carry the familiar vibrance of students waiting for buses crossing cities towards universities and colleges. That feeling has instead been replaced by the hardship of displacement. Israel's destructive campaign has reduced Gaza's academic institutions to rubble, many now repurposed as crowded shelters for displaced families. With campuses gone, in-person education has largely disappeared, forcing universities to shift to online learning. But for students living in tents, struggling to secure food, water, electricity, and internet, attending a lecture, even online, has become a privilege. Amid this chaos, a glimmer of hope has materialized. In the densely crowded area of Al-Mawazi in southern Gaza's Khan Yunis, a new academic initiative is taking shape, Scholars Without Borders. A U.S. non-governmental organization has established what it calls University City, a makeshift academic space designed to bring students back into lecture halls. Built from wood, metal sheets, and whatever materials could be sourced locally, the site stands as a modest reconstruction of what Gaza's academic life once looked like. Despite the hardships, our mission is to bring education closer to students in a better environment, says Hamza Abu Daka, the organization's representative in Gaza. We designed this space to serve multiple academic institutions and as many students as possible, he added. There are 6 halls here, accommodating up to 600 students a day. It may look simple, but it creates a sense of normal academic life, something students have been deprived of. The space includes internet access powered by solar panels, improvised green areas, and even a small business incubator aimed at helping students engage on their own prospects. According to the organization, University City operates on a rotating weekly schedule, with each day allocating to a different academic institution. This system allows multiple institutions to share the limited space, ensuring the widest possible access for students. Given the constraints, universities prioritize courses that require in-person instruction the most, such as practical and discussion-based classes. Gaza's prominent universities, such as the Islamic University and Al-Azhar University, have been using the site alongside other colleges like the Palestinian College of Nursing. But behind this modest structure lies a far heavier reality. A glimpse of what was lost. Across Gaza, universities have been systematically damaged or destroyed since Israel began its genocidal war in October 2023. In the south, all institutions have been rendered inoperable. A limited number of campuses in northern Gaza have been partially restored, but their capacity remains extremely restricted. The Palestine College of Nursing, for example, has been surrounded by ruins after falling within the yellow line where the Israeli military continues to be based since the October ceasefire, cutting off students from their classrooms entirely. For a generation of students, university life has simply not existed, as they instead battled to survive. Each academic year is usually marked by new beginnings, especially for freshmen stepping into a new phase of independence and discovery. But for 2 consecutive years, thousands of Gaza students have been denied that experience. Now, inside University City, they are encountering it for the first time. It feels like a real university. Mariam Nasser, 20, a first-year nursing student displaced from Rafah, said in one of the makeshift halls, reflecting on what the space meant to her. Before the genocide, everything we needed to study was available. Our homes, electricity, materials, and most importantly, safety, she said. But for more than 2 years, our lives have been completely disrupted. Mariam began her final year of high school just as the war started. It took more than a year to complete her exams under difficult conditions before she could finally enroll in the university. I always dreamed of studying medicine, she said, but the circumstances affected my result. My late grandfather told me that healing people isn't limited to one path, so I chose nursing. Still, her degree requires in-person courses, something she had never experienced until now. When I saw this place, I was amazed, she said. It was the first time I attended classes in a space that actually feels like a university. We are all excited. It feels different. It feels real. For students like Miriam, their first year was spent behind screens, if they were lucky to have one in their tents, disconnected from the academic environment they had hoped for. Amr Mohammed, 20, another first-year nursing student from Al-Maghazi camp in central Gaza, shared a similar reaction. I expected something much simpler, just tents and basic setups, he said, but this was different. Being here with other students discussing and engaging in class makes a huge difference. In addition to our regular stories, we have an article for Let's Do the Good News Again this week. A French city cut its marine pollution and its seagrass bounced back. From news.mongabay.com, originally published on April 7th, 2026. Neptune grass is generally regarded as the most ecologically important seagrass and shallow water habitat in the Mediterranean Sea. It suffered a severe decline during the 20th century, and there have been myriad efforts to actively restore it via replanting schemes. A new study points to the merits of a different approach: remove the human-caused drivers of the decline and let the meadows regrow on their own. The study, published on March 5th in the journal Marine Environmental Research, found that following the introduction of stronger environmental regulations and practices in France in the mid to late 1980s, Neptune grass, Posidonia oceana, repopulated sample sections of the waters off the city of Marseille over the ensuing 4 decades. We observed exceptional recovery of the meadow in the Bay of Marseille. Patrick Astra, a research engineer at GIS Poseidoni and the study's lead author, told Mongabay. GIS Poseidoni is a non-profit marine research group based on the Marseille University campus. Astra called it a very positive trend and a lesson in the value of passive restoration, which involves letting seagrass meadows regrow naturally after reducing pollution and other threats. Pollution in progress. Neptune grass, named after the trident-wielding god of the sea in Roman mythology, hosts up to a quarter of marine species in the Mediterranean, which is the only place it grows. It is the sea's most important ecosystem engineer. Ostrich and his co-authors write, Neptune grass meadows serve as the basis for food webs that the fishing industry relies on, and the species is, as Astra called it, the world champion of carbon sequestration, by mitigating the effects of human emissions as well as or better than mangroves or tropical forests. Yet Neptune grass grows very slowly and has proven vulnerable to pollution and other threats, including bottom trawling, anchoring, and coastal development projects. Climate change and invasive species are also factors in its decline. Roughly 7% of Neptune grass biomass was lost annually in the half century prior to 2009, according to a 2014 study in the journal Biological Conservation. The historical damage was particularly severe off Marseille, a city of roughly 2 million people on the northwestern Mediterranean coast. The city dumped its untreated wastewater into the Bay of Marseille, while industrial and urban waste entered the bay via coastal rivers. Coastal development and infrastructure projects also had an effect. In the 1970s, while the city was reconstructing a subway system, it used much of the excavated material from digging tunnels to build artificial breakwaters and beaches. This directly covered some Neptune grass meadows and added sediment to the water, rendering it more opaque and less ideal for the species' growth, Ostrich said. The situation was so bad, Ostrich said, calling the 1980s the likely low point for Neptune grass around Marseille. However, in 1987, the city began operating a wastewater treatment plant that removed most contaminants, and the French government instituted key environmental regulations during that period. These included a law limiting coastal development and a decree that designated Neptune grass as a protected marine species whose destruction was prohibited. The grass was later protected under European laws and regulations. To gauge the effects of these changes, Ostrich and his team took advantage of earlier work. In 1989, researchers laid down concrete markers on the seabed not far from the shore, forming two 36 square meter, 388 square foot areas called quadrats, in which the amount of Neptune grass coverage could be measured. Measurements were taken until 1999 and then stopped due to lack of funding, with no data for the next quarter century. The team, mostly from GIS Poseidoni, took hundreds of underwater photographs of the quadrat areas and used software to map the Neptune grass meadow. In one quadrat, coverage increased from 47% in 1986 to 94% in 2025. In the other, it jumped from 6% to 81%. This landmark 40-year study from Marseille offers compelling evidence that Posidonia oceanica meadows can achieve near full recovery once anthropogenic pressures are decisively removed. Maria Salomidi, marine ecologist and researcher at the Institute of Oceanography of the Hellenic Center for Marine Research in Greece, told Mongabay in an email, calling the recovery remarkable. Salomidi wasn't involved in the Marseille study. Ostrich, who worked at GIS Poseidoni since 2007, said he'd long waited to find and study the quadrats, but hadn't had the funding until recently. He said his research was possible because of funding from the city of Marseille, which since 2020 has been led by a left-wing coalition that pushed Neptune grass conservation. In addition to our regular stories, we have the Wheel of Good Fortune this week. Currently, there are 16 stories waiting in the missed queue after these articles were chosen. The wheel spins this week were as follows: 5, 11. First up, plastic bottles recycled into Parkinson's drug using bacteria. Originally published on the 16th of March, 2026. From Dezeen.com, University of Edinburgh researchers have used bacteria to turn plastic waste into a Parkinson's drug, advancing a new approach known as bio-upcycling. The University of Edinburgh biotechnology researchers successfully synthesized the drug L-Dopa, also known as levodopa, from the raw ingredient of post-consumer waste plastic, in a process they say is more sustainable than relying on pharmaceuticals' usual feedstock of fossil fuels. The process involved breaking down PET, the plastic widely used in food and drink packaging, and feeding it to genetically engineered E. coli bacteria, which built it back up again with a different molecular structure. The researchers believe it is the first time a natural biological process has been used to turn plastic waste into a medication for a neurological disease. The method constitutes a type of bio-upcycling, an emergent field that uses microbes and enzymes to convert waste into higher value products. Bio-upcycling has particularly focused on plastic waste due to the finite nature of the material's crude oil feedstock and the insufficiencies of its recycling, which have seen plastic pollution become a major environmental and public health issue. With bio-upcycling, microorganisms are engineered with special enzymes that enable them to sever the super strong links between molecules in plastic, similar to what happens naturally with the Idonella saccharensis bacterium, found in 2001 outside of a recycling plant in Japan, or to synthesize new links once it's broken down. For the L-Dopa project, the researchers used a mix of chemical and biological processes, taking PET that had been chemically polymerized into molecules of terephthalic acid, and then using engineered bacteria to transform these molecules into L-Dopa through a series of 4 enzymatic reactions triggered through 7 genes. Proponents of bioupcycling believe that it could be used to replace not just the medicines that are currently synthesized from petrochemicals, but also substances such as flavorings, fragrances, cosmetics, animal feed, and fuel. This feels like just the beginning, said University of Edinburgh professor Stephen Wallace, who led the research. If we can create medicines for neurological disease from a waste plastic bottle, it's exciting to imagine what else this technology could achieve. Plastic waste is often seen as an environmental problem, but it represents a vast, untapped source of carbon, he continued. By engineering biology to transform plastic into an essential medicine, we show how waste materials can be reimagined as valuable resources that support human health. Whilst previous research at the university has included synthesizing the flavoring vanillin from plastic waste, an achievement that designer Eleonora Ortolani built on in 2023 to make an ice cream too experimental to eat. The research has continued since then, and the researchers have detailed their work on L-Dopa synthesis in a paper published in the peer-reviewed journal Nature Sustainability today. Their next step will be to advance the technology towards industrial application. It is unknown if bio-upcycling will ever be able to be applied to vast quantities of plastic waste at a time. For this reason, anti-plastic activists, it is unknown if bio-upcycling will ever be able to be applied to vast quantities of plastic waste at a time. For this reason, anti-plastic activists often do not see it as a solution for the urgent problem of plastic pollution. Probably isn't, and we just saw somebody develop a new polymer, or catalyst. So we'll have to see on that. And our second article for Wheel of Good Fortune is the Wabanaki basket makers' plans to save Maine's ash trees. Originally published on March 30th, 2026, from InsideClimateNews.org. Each strip of wood in Richard Syllaboy's hand started as a year of an ash tree's life. Syllaboy, 79, is a member of the Micmac tribe and a master basket maker. His blue eyes are kind and frequently crinkle into a smile, and his hands are constantly busy as he talks. In his workshop in Littleton, Maine, surrounded by logs, splints, and the sound of country music, Syllaboy says making ash baskets is so peaceful and spiritual. His baskets are bound up in the past, the history of his tribe, his family, and the trees themselves. But lately, Syllaboy is thinking more about the ash tree's future. The emerald ash borer, an invasive species of beetle, is creeping across Maine, bringing the possibility of near total extinction for the state's ash species and a potentially devastating loss to what Syllaboy calls the oldest art in the Northeast. But so far, a majority of Maine's trees are alive and healthy, and the tribe's members, scientists, and government officials are trying to keep it that way. The basket tree. There are 5 Wabanaki tribes: Abenaki, Maliseet, Micmac, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot. In all of their languages, the name for the brown ash tree translates to the basket tree. In the Wabanaki creation story, the hero Glooskap shot an arrow into the basket tree, and out came the native people singing and dancing, Silboy said. Basket makers favor brown ash because of the way its rings glow without fibers connecting them. When a log is pounded with a mallet or axe, Silboy said, the rings split easily and can be shaved thinner and cut into strips for weaving. It'd be as strong as a piece of nylon, and it's very pliable, Silboy said. There are other materials used in basket making: cedar, birch, sweetgrass, but none are quite like brown ash. There's just no comparison in the basket quality, according to John Daigle, a member of the Penobscot Nation and the project leader for the Ash Protection Collaboration across Wapanakik, APCAW, a group of researchers and tribe members working together on ash protection. You just don't find those qualities in other trees, Daigle said. Ash trees in Maine are a really small percentage of our trees, but they're just important trees. Wabanaki basket making goes back centuries. Post-colonization, it became an essential source of income. The large utility baskets were widely used on potato farms during the early and mid-1900s, while smaller fancy baskets were sold roadside or door-to-door. The drum-like sounding of ash pounding is still recognizable on tribal lands. At some points in time, some elders said they could tell who was pounding based on the speed and the sound, said Tyler Everett, 30, a member of the Micmac Nation and doctoral student working with APCAW. Basketry holds family memories. Everett lives in Maine today because his great-grandparents moved from Nova Scotia to sell potato baskets. Daigle recalls his grandparents' spare room filled to the brim with ash splints and baskets ready to sell. He hopes to take up basket making in retirement. Silboy's earliest memories include helping his mother and brothers collect and prepare the ash splints. When he left home at 13, Silboy swore he'd never touch another basket. He came back to the art form in the 1980s while helping basket makers sell their work. Silboy found that few makers knew how to properly find, harvest, and prepare their own materials. I was quite discouraged about that, so I said, I know how to do this, he said. Concerted efforts by the Wabanaki tribes and teachers like Silboy have led to the revival of interest in basketry. 2 of his 5 grandchildren and several of his grandchildren have learned the art form. In 2017, with help from family, Silboy created the world's largest potato basket, which is over 7 feet tall. It's something that's really special, that we really need to try to retain and not give up, Daigle said. The modern resurgence of Wabanaki basket making, however, is threatened by the encroaching emerald ash borer and the potential loss of the basket tree. We're all wondering what we can do about it, Silboy said. And that is the end of this week's articles. Hopefully they added a little positive joy to your life. Before we end, I have our final segment of the show, something I like to call A Tale of Two Paragraphs. In this segment, I take the first and last part of an article on Substack or another similar source and read them to you. To encourage you to go read the article yourself, many people forget the power of the written word to move us and how intriguing the middle of the story is. The less I read, the better, but people often want to know how we got to endings more than the endings themselves, and maybe then you will go exploring the Substack and read the paragraphs in between. This week's article is from the Sorota Substack entitled Graham Plattner Makes Clear Pod Will Not Save America, and comes from sorota.substack.com. It's rare that the influencer podcast ecosystem produces anything other than noise and monetizable engagement, much less a truly important and clarifying revelation. But today is an exception. This brief exchange between Pod Save America's Jon Favreau and Maine Senate candidate Graham Plattner is a time capsule-worthy illustration of the divide in the Democratic Party and the cartoonish lies still being peddled by the party elite. What's more, it perfectly encapsulates how somehow, even now, that elite still doesn't really understand what has happened in this country. A few paragraphs in between, and an ending of course, I don't know whether Plattner will win. I don't know what kind of senator he might be. I don't know if he's elected, whether he'd betray all of what he's saying. And he told me a while back he'd be circumspect about himself if he were me, or anyone else looking at his candidacy, or that of any other politician. But this isn't only about him. It's about the larger divide in the party that depicts itself as the opposition to authoritarianism. Democrats can only be that opposition if they come to terms with their party's participation in the nightmare we're now immersed in, and then start making different decisions. We hope you enjoyed our show, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, so I won't. Have a good day.